You've probably had a lot of experiences where you've met someone and you've immediately developed a rather strong, vivid attitude, like, "What a suspicious dude!" Or, "Oh, what a snowflake!" Or maybe, "I don't know, but I can feel I can trust this person." The question is, how manipulable are these first impressions of ours? We would all love to think that we are capable of accurately reading a person at first sight. However, is that really the case? To answer this question, the famous American social psychologist Kelley conducted a curious experiment, which later made its way into textbooks on the psychosocial foundations of human behavior. In 1950, the psychologist informed two different groups of students that they would have a new teacher. And the only thing he changed in his story about the new professor was just one phrase. To one group of students, he said, "People who know this professor consider him to be a friendly, cheerful person." And to another group, he said, "People who know this professor think he is a rather cold person." After 20 minutes of interaction with the new teacher, the students were given surveys, and the results turned out to be much more favorable for the friendly professor than for the cold one, even though, as you understand, it was the same person who conducted the lesson in exactly the same way, using the same tone, phrases, etc. What's more, not only the impressions of the students differed, the behavior of the group and the atmosphere in the class were also different from the very beginning. Students tried to avoid contact with the cold professor and were much less likely to express their opinion and participate in discussions. And now imagine if with just a single phrase one can completely change people's perception and moreover even their behavior towards a person, then how biased can we be in our everyday life? Unintended comments, our previous experience, not to mention unconsciously absorbed norms that society imposes on us regarding a million things. All of this can simply have a radical effect on such a fragile substance as our perception or impressions. Can we avoid this? Unlikely. But we can minimize our subjectivity simply by being aware that as long as we have little verified information about a person, we shouldn't make definitive conclusions about them. However, this applies not only to people, but also to events, news, etc. It is worth noting that among people unfamiliar with psychology, there are quite popular opinions about first impressions that sound something like this.
First impressions of a person come to us from the subconscious, and it never lies.
Well, what can I say? Only one thing. Unfortunately, this opinion is mistaken. Firstly, in psychology, there is no concept of the subconscious. There is a concept of unconscious processes in the psyche, which includes unconsciously formed reactions and judgments, which are based on our experience, cultural background, and on other people's opinions. And yes, our very first conclusions can be erroneous. Otherwise, there would be no victims of scams and con artists, both male and female, to whom their intuition suggested that they had finally met their soulmate or were about to close the deal of the century. In fact, a major part of the scam field is built on a skillful manipulation of a person's first impressions. However, in defense of those who believe in first impressions, I can also say that there are indeed studies showing that people's first impressions were closest to the truth. But two important points should be noted here. Firstly, those impressions were far from 100% accurate. And secondly, and most importantly, these studies provided participants with photographs or videos of people about whom they knew absolutely nothing. That is, they had no additional information about the subject, and the subjects themselves did not try to act or produce any particular impression. As you understand, this almost never happens in real life. Typically, before meeting someone, we already have some knowledge, at least about their occupation. Additionally, consciously or unconsciously, most of people behave in a way to manipulate the person's first impression of them. This doesn't necessarily mean anything negative. For most people, it's natural to want to make a good impression on new colleagues, acquaintances, or their partner's parents. There is also a second, rather popular opinion. Some people tend to think,
"I won't believe anyone until I have formed an impression of them myself. No TV programs, stereotypes, or other people's opinions will sway me. I draw my own conclusions objectively."
But the thing is, it is not even necessary to believe or disbelieve in the power of stereotypes or other people's opinions, because such things usually work bypassing our consciousness. We may not even be aware of our cognitive biases. And And if you have lived more than one day, your consciousness is no longer completely pure. In fact, in most cases, it's already cluttered with memories, experiences, beliefs, learned stereotypes, and so on. This inevitably affects how we perceive a completely new person. So, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit a like. And next time, I'll talk about the unpleasant phenomenon we've all encountered: frustration.